So Rand Paul appeared on the show Rising. By the way, I'm not sure he would do that if it was Crystal and Sagar who were still over there. Not sure. But anyway, Ryan Grimm sometimes does a very good job. And he asked Rand Paul a direct question about what's currently going on in Afghanistan. And listen to Rand Paul's answer. Then I'm going to give you some brutal facts.
And one real quick question on Afghanistan. You've said you don't want the Biden administration offering more aid to Afghanistan, but at the same time, the administration is holding on to $7 billion in assets that belong to the Afghan government, and not releasing them back to the central bank as they were before. Do you think that the Biden administration ought to continue holding on to the Afghan assets, or ought to release it back to the Afghan government?
It's probably hard for me to imagine that something we're holding is actually an Afghan asset. We were giving them $50 billion a year. I would think the $7 billion is stuff they owe us. But it also wasn't, it's for a government. This is a government that took over in a military junta. It's not a legitimate elected government. No way in the world would I give them that money. And the thing is we've spent billions and billions, if not trillions there. And I think it's a big mistake. And to reward people, look, as much as I was for leaving, the Taliban agreement, they broke every bit of the agreement. They said they wouldn't advance and they wouldn't take cities until we had gone, and they did anyway. So I think they've broken every agreement we had, and I would put that money back in the Treasury. We don't have it to give anyway. I mean, it's, the thing is all it is more borrowed money. So I wouldn't give it to them.
So Rand Paul's take is no, don't release the money that already belongs to Afghanistan back to Afghanistan. Let me show you what the impact of that would be. Take a look at this. This is from Truth Out, but it's also been reported in a number of places. 1 million Afghan children may die from starvation over the next several months, according to the United Nations. Nearly 23 million Afghans are facing crisis levels of hunger, and 8.7 million are on the brink of starvation. This mass hunger has rendered millions of Afghans on the verge of death, according to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Alongside looming mass starvation, Afghans face below-freezing temperatures, severe shortages of life-saving medical supplies, and extreme poverty, making conditions in Afghanistan among the gravest of human rights crises on Earth. This is not a natural disaster, nor is it the result of conflict internal to Afghanistan. This is a human-made humanitarian catastrophe. United States made specifically. The U.S. allied Afghan government, most recently under the rule of Ashraf Ghani, was heavily dependent on foreign aid. Following the Taliban takeover in mid-August 2021, the Biden administration and the UN Security Council instituted devastating sanctions, sharply reducing foreign aid. The Biden administration froze $9.7 billion worth of Afghanistan's foreign currency reserves, roughly equivalent to 40% of the country's gross domestic product. $9.5 billion that is their own money. Now, they've given them a drip, couple $100 million here and there to try to stave off aspects of the starvation, but clearly, it is not enough. Now, Rand Paul's like, well, that's our money anyway, because it was foreign aid and we don't even have the money. If you invade a country, by the way, Afghanistan did not attack us. They did not attack us. Osama bin Laden attacked us on 9/11. For a little while, he was in Afghanistan, and the Taliban was nominally protecting him. And then when he was killed, he was in Pakistan, by the way. But we invaded a country that didn't attack us. We occupied it for 20 years. There was a lot of death, a lot of destruction, and yeah, you think if you're going to do that, which you shouldn't do in the first place, at the very least, you could have a little bit of foreign aid to make sure that the people there don't starve. It's like you destroy a country, and then in some minor ways you offset the destruction with some money. And Rand Paul looks at even that, and he's like, that's crazy. We shouldn't do that. We don't even have the money, and this is really our money, and so it would be a bad idea to give to them. Okay, well, there are consequences to that, Rand, and the consequences are worse than the war itself. That is a fact. If millions of people are starving or on the brink of starvation, and they're filling up the hospitals, and the country's devastated, and everybody's living in extreme poverty and degradation, and we have the ability to do something about that simply by giving them back their own money, and you say no, that makes you a war criminal. That makes you a war criminal equal to or worse than the people who ran rightly rips when they were for the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. See, like the libertarian perspective is like, it's a principled non-interventionist stance. Okay, credit where it's due. I agree with that. That's a good position. But then what? As long as it's not at the barrel of a gun, then you're okay with even worse death and devastation? Because that's what you're saying here. That's what you're saying. Sometimes millions of people are going to starve. What you going to do? Is that really your position? That's really your position. And make no mistake about it, the reason why Biden is not releasing all of the money is very simply because he thinks it'll give the Republicans an optics victory. Because then the Republicans will go out there and say, why did Joe Biden fund the Taliban to the tune of $9 billion? He gave the Taliban billions. Pro-Taliban Joe. That's exactly what the Republicans would do, and it would be a lie. It would be a lie, because the point of that money is to ease the on-the-ground circumstances for civilians and women and children in Afghanistan. That's what the point would be. And by the way, you're crazy if you think, no, if you release that $9 billion, the Taliban will sit on it the entire time, and you'd still have the same number of people starving. Absolutely not. In fact, there's a long history. What the Taliban does, and look, it's a trick, but it's a trick that works because there's also material benefit in doing the trick. Whenever they were in control of a region, in many instances, they would treat the people, give them more material well-being than the corrupt Western-aligned governments. Now, in the big cities, it's a different story. In the big cities, there were more social freedoms, and they did better off. But in a lot of the rural areas, that's not the case. And a lot of the people in those rural areas had more of an alliance with and an allegiance to the Taliban than they did the disconnected, corrupt, Western-aligned governments. Look, guys, this is just a fact. You can be triggered by it if you want, but this is geopolitics. This is what went down. This is the history of it. So, no, they wouldn't just sit on the money. I'm sure they would be okay. They would look after themselves, no doubt. There would be, a disconnect in terms of the ruling class would do much better, just like the ruling class in every country does much better. I'm sure they'd rig it to one extent or another, but it absolutely would fix some of the hunger, death, devastation. It would stop the country from absolutely imploding. It would stop the refugee crisis, which is already underway right now. But they don't want to do it. Biden doesn't want to do it because he doesn't want to give the Republicans an optics victory. And Rand Paul doesn't want to do it because something, we're broke, we need the money. And do we need the money more than them? Do we need the money that is literally theirs more than them? Even if we did, that's not a reason to keep it because it's their money. But we don't. Millions of people starving. It just shows you how corrupt and disconnected and out of touch and vicious they could be in Washington, D.C. Because again, the impact of this is quite literally worse than the war itself. Literally. And nobody cares. Nobody cares. And you feel so far removed from the situation that it's like, whatever, what are you going to do? Got some poor Afghan children and women and civilians starving. Shouldn't have had your country taken over by the Taliban. And I don't, this idea of like, well, we would never release that because we wouldn't dare support an authoritarian government like that. 73% of the world's dictatorships are funded by the U.S. 73% are armed by the U.S. So clearly it's not a principled stance against that. It's just not. They don't care about the civilians because the civilians are Afghani. So there you have it. Totally unacceptable. And even the nominally anti-war libertarian Rand Paul is like, I said I was anti-war. I didn't say I was anti-starvation. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.